Shalom, shalom. This is Howard. I'm in the Kolbrin Bible, and I'm about to read what I was supposed to read some days ago. I had a crazy week. Alright, so this is the book of manuscripts. This is chapter 3, The Destroyer, part 1, from the Great Scroll. I read this before, but it's so far back in my videos. I read a couple things. I know the book of Gleanings, the book of Creations, the book of Battle of Eve, Halloween, the gods of the Anglo-Saxons. I read a lot of stuff, but it's so far back. I just said I'll just start reading this stuff over for y'all. Alright, so here we go. Men forgot the days of the destroyer. Only the wise knew where it went and that it will return in its appointed hour. It raged across the heavens in the days of wrath, and this was its likeness. It was as a bellowing cloud of smoke, enwrapped in a ruddy glow, not distinguishable in joint or limb, its mouth as an abyss from which came flame, smoke, and hot cinders. When ages pass, certain laws operate upon the stars in heaven. Their ways change. There is a movement and restlessness. They are no longer constant, and a great light appears redly, in the sky, in the skies. So that's something we should pay attention to. I'm gonna read this again, so it's something to look, so that way you have an idea when it's coming. When ages pass, certain laws operate upon the stars in the heavens. Their ways change. There is movement and restlessness. They are no longer constant, and a great light appears redly, so it's redly, in the skies. When blood drops upon the earth, the destroyer will appear, and the mountains will open up and belch forth fire and ashes. Trees will be destroyed and all living things engulfed. Waters will be swallowed up by the land, and seas will boil. The heavens will burn brightly and readily. There will be a copper hue over the face of the land, followed by a day of darkness. A new moon will appear and break up and fall. So a new moon will appear and break up and fall. The people will scatter in madness. They will hear the trumpet and the battle cry of the destroyer, and will seek refuge in the den of the earth. Terror will eat away their hearts, and their courage will flow from them like water from a broken pitcher. They will be eaten up in the flames of wrath and consumed by the breath of the destroyer. Thus, in the days of heavenly wrath, which have gone, and thus it will be in the days of doom. So that's a reference to, I think that's Isaiah. It says, the day of doom. Pretty much, I think that actually it's in Ezekiel. I'm sorry, Ezekiel 38. Matter of fact, the days of doom, when it comes again, the times of its coming and going are known unto the wise. These are the signs and times which shall precede the destroyer's return. 110 generations shall pass into the west, and nations will rise and fall. Men will fly in the air as birds, those airplanes, and swim in the seas as fishes, those are submarines and boats, and jet skis and whatever else they got. Men will talk peace with one another. Hypocrisy and deceit shall have their day. That's what's going on right now. They always talking peace, and then they, you know what they do. Women will be as men. Yup. And men as women. Yup. Passion will be a plaything of men. Yup. A nation of soothsayers shall rise and fall, and their tongue shall be the speech of learned. Wow, I know who they are. A nation of lawgivers shall rule the earth and pass away into nothingness. One worship will pass into the four corners of the earth, talking peace and bringing war. That's Christianity. Well, actually, it's just pretty much the worship of Thoth. So it don't matter what religion you in. It's still, you're just worshiping the same God. It don't matter if you're a Buddhist, you're a Muslim, you're a Christian. You're all worshiping the same gods. A nation of the seas will be greater than any other. That's talking about the Spaniards. But will be as an apple rotten at the core, and will not endure. A nation of traders will destroy men with wonders, and it shall have its day. So the traders, actually the traders and the seamen are the Spaniards and the English and the French. Because that's what they did. They traded, and they traded slaves, and, well, Judah said the same thing I'm saying anyway. All right, after to the core shall have its day. Okay. Then shall the high strive with the low, the north with the south, the east with the west, and the light with the darkness. Men shall be divided by their races. That's as it's going on right now. And the children will be born as strangers among them. Yep. Brother shall strive with brother, and husband with wife. Fathers will no longer instruct their sons, and their sons will be wayward. That's going on right now. Women will become a common property of men. Yep. And will no longer be held in regard and respect. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Then men will be ill at ease in their hearts. They will seek, they will know not what, and uncertainty and doubt will trouble them. They will possess great riches, but be poor in spirit. Then will the heavens tremble, and the earth move. Men will quake in fear, and while terror walks with them, the heralds of doom will appear. They will come softly as thieves to the tombs. Men will know them for what they are. Men will be deceived. The hour of the destroyer is at hand. I think the heralds of doom is them orbs. So all them orbs they've been seeing in the sky, and they don't know what they are. And it said they do come softly, like you don't hear them, and they look beautiful, and people are amazed at them, but they don't understand that's that's actually like an impending doom, and they don't even realize it. But they scared because they don't know what's going on, but they have a feeling. Like I was watching the news thing, they said they just got a bad feeling something's about to happen, but they don't know what. And we sitting here telling them, and they just ain't listening. All right. It says no one will know what they are. Men will be deceived. The hour of the destroyer is at hand. In those days, men will have the great book before them. Wisdom will be revealed. The few will be gathered for the stand. It is the hour of trial. The dauntless one will survive. The stout-hearted will not go down to destruction. Great God of all ages, alike to all, who sets the trials of men, but be merciful to our children in the days of doom. Man must suffer to be great, but hasten not his progress unduly. In the great winnowing, be not too harsh on the lesser ones among men. Even the son of a thief has become your scribe. All right. Keep it moving. So this is Destroyer Part 2. The Great Scroll. So this is Part 2. O sentinels of the universe, who watch for the Destroyer, how long will your coming the gale last? O mortal men, who wait without understanding, where will you hide yourselves in the dread days of doom? Sorry. When the heavens shall be torn apart and the skies rent in twain, in the days when children will turn gray-headed. This is the thing which will be seen. This is the terror your eyes will behold. This is the form of the destruction that will rush upon you. There will be the great body of fire, the great glowing head with many mouths and eyes, ever changing. Terrible teeth will be seen in formless mouths, and a fearful dark belly will glow readily. From fires inside, even the most stout-hearted man will tremble, and his bowels will be loosened. You won't go to the bathroom on itself. For this is not a thing understandable to men. It will be a vast sky-spanning form, unwrapping earth, burning with many hues within wide open mouths. So it sounds like this thing is going to have a couple heads. This will descend and sweep across the face of the land, engulfing all in the yawning jaws. The greatest warriors will charge against it in vain. So I don't think this is going to be, I think this actually is going to be some type of creature, because why would a man run towards smoke and fire? That's dumb. Like, what are you going to do? You see what I'm saying? So this is going to be some type of, it's probably going to be a dragon of fire. It's probably going to be a dragon that's fire and smoke. It probably is. That's what it sounds like. Charge against it in vain. The fangs will fall out, and lo, they are terror-inspiring things. So it has teeth. So yeah, it got to be probably a dragon with several heads. Of cold hardened water. Great boulders will be hurled down upon men, crushing them into red powder. As the great salt water rise up in its train, and roaring torrents pour towards the land, that sounds like a tsunami. Even the heroes among mortal men will be overcome with madness, as moths fly swiftly to their doom in the burning flame. So will these men rush to their own destruction. The flames going before will devour all the works of men. The waters following will sweep away whatever remains. So that, and everything gonna be burned, and then it's gonna be swept away by a witch calm. I just forgot what I just called it. A tsunami. All right, where was I at? All right, well, follow man, swept away remains. Okay. The dew of death will fall softly as gray carpet over the cleared land. Men will cry out in their madness, or whatever being there is saved, or whatever being there is, whatever being. So this is what the men gonna be saying. Men will cry out in their madness, oh, whatever being there is, save us from this tall form of terror. Save us from the great dew of death. Wow, so they're going to be calling out to the Most High, and they ain't going to even know his name. They're just going to say whatever great being is up there, save us from this thing. You should have thought about that when you was running around talking stupid. All right, so this is part 3. The doomed shape called the Destroyer in Egypt was seen in all the lands, whereabouts in color, It was bright and fiery in appearance, changing and unstable. It twisted about itself like a coil, like water bubbling into a pool from an underground supply, and all men agree it was a most fearsome sight. It was not a great comet or a lucent star, being more like a fiery body of flame. Its movements on high were slow. Below it swirled in the manner of smoke, and it remained close to the sun, whose face it hid. There was a bloody redness about it, which changed and as it passed along its course, it caused death and destruction in its rising and setting. It swept the earth with great cinder rain and caused many plagues, hunger, and other evils. It bit the skin of men and beasts until they became motted with sores. The earth was troubled and shook. The hills and the mountains moved and rocked. The dark smoke filled the heavens, bowed over the earth, and the great howl came to the ears of men, borne to them upon the wings of the wind. It was the cry of the dark Lord, the master of dread. Thick clouds of fiery smoke passed before him, and there was an awful hail of hot stones and coals of fire. The doom shape thundered sharply in the heavens and shot out bright lightnings. The channels of water were turned back into themselves when the land tilted, and great trees were tossed about and snapped like twigs. Then a voice like 10,000 trumpets was heard over the wilderness, and before its burning breath and flames parted, the whole of the land moved and the mountains melted. The sky itself roared like 10,000 lions, and agony and bright arrows of blood sped back and forth across its face. Earth swelled up like bread upon the hearth. This was the aspect of the doom shape called the destroyer, when it appeared in the days long gone by in olden times. It is thus described in the old records, few of which remain, and it is that when it appears in the heavens above, earth splits open from the heat like a nut roasted before a fire. Then flames shoot up through the surface and leap about like fiery fiends upon black blood. The moisture inside the land is dried up. The pastures and cultivated places are consumed in flames, and all trees become white ash. The doom shape is like a circling ball of flame, which scatters small fiery offspring in its train. It covers about the fifth part of the sky and sends writhing snake-like fingers down to earth. Before the sky appears frightened. Before it, the sky appears frightened, and it breaks up and scatters away. Midday is no brighter than night. It spawns a host of terrible things. These are the things said of the destroyer on the old records. Read them with a solemn heart, knowing that the doom shape has its appointed time and it will return. It would be foolish to let them go unheeded. Now men say such things are not disdained for our days. May the great God above grant that this be so. But come the day surely will, and in accordance with his nature, man will be unprepared. All right, I think it's another one. And I'm going to read the dark days real quick, okay? The dark days began with the last visitation of the destroyer, and they were foretold by strange omens in the sky. See that? And all men were silent and went about with pale faces. The leaders of the slaves, sounds the same thing, pale faces, leader of the slaves, which had built a city to the glory of Thom, stirred up an unrest, and no man raised his arm against them. They foretold great events of which the people were ignorant and of which the temple seers were not informed. These were the days of ominous calm, when the people waited for what they knew not. The presence of an unseen doom was felt. The hearts of men were stricken. That's what's going on right now. Laughter was not heard no more, and grief and wailing sounded through the land. Even voices of children were stilled, and they did not play together, but stood silent. The slaves became bold and insolent, and women were the possessions of any man. Fear walked the land, and the women became barren with terror, and they could not conceive, and those with child aborted. All men closed up within himself. The days of stillness was followed by a time when the noise of trumpeting and shrilling was heard in the heavens. That's happening right now too. And the people became as frightened beasts without a herdsman, and asses and lions proud without of their fold. That's happening too. That's actually happening in England and actually in Canada and stuff. These animals are coming out the woods, but that's in the scripts too. That the animals going to leave their homes and go into the cities, the forests and stuff. The people spoke of the God of the slaves, and reckless men said, if we knew where this God were to be found, we would sacrifice to him. But the God of the slaves was not among them. He was not to be found within the swamplands or in the brick pits. His manifestation was in the heavens, and all men to see, but they did not see with understanding, nor would any God listen, for all were dumb because of the hypocrisy of men. The dead were no longer sacred, and were thrown into the waters. Those are actually, they doing that right now, y'all. Y'all know that they've been throwing dead bodies in rivers. I forgot where I saw that at on the news. It might be in China. I'm not sure where it was at, but I know I saw it on the news. All those already in tune were neglected, and many became exposed. They lay unprotected against the hands of thieves. He who once toiled long in the sun, bearing the yoke himself, now possess oxen. That's true. Because remember, at one point, we used to toil in the fields and stuff like that, and now we don't do that no more. We pretty much, I ain't gonna say we got ox. Well, we had ox at one point, but you see what I'm saying. We don't do that no more. We drive cars and stuff like that. So that's pretty much saying that at one point we were in the fields bearing the yoke ourselves, like picking and planting and doing all that stuff. When they had us in that type of captivity. And it says now possess oxen, so it's a different type of captivity. He who grew no grain now owned the storehouse, and that's literally what's going on now. Full. He who once dwelt at ease among his children now thirsts for water. That's about to happen for them. He who once sat in the sun with crumbs and dregs was now bloated with food. He reclined in the shade, his bowels overflowing. Yeah, that's about to happen. Cattle were left unattended to roam into strange pastures, and men ignored their marks and slew the beasts of their neighbors. No man owned anything. I think that is happening now too. I'm not sure. I think it is. The public records were cast forth and destroyed, and no man knew who were slaves and who were masters. Yeah, that's actually happening. The people cried out to the Pharaoh in their distress, but he stopped his ears and acted like a deaf man. Even though it's funny that the Most High said there's nothing new under the sun, because this actually is happening again. There were those who spoke falsely before Pharaoh and had gods hostile towards the land. Therefore the people cried out for their blood to appease it. But it was not these strange priests who pushed strife in the land instead of peace, for one was even of the household of Pharaoh and walked among the people unhampered. Dust and smoke clouds darkened the skies and colored the waters upon which they fell with a bloody hue. Plague was throughout the land. The river was bloody, and blood was everywhere. And there is a lot of rivers turning to blood too here, y'all. The waters was vile, and men's stomachs shrunk from drinking. Those who did drink from the river vomited up, for it was polluted. The dust tore wounds in the skin of men and beasts. In the glow of the destroyer, the earth was filled with the redness. Vermin bred and filled the air, and the face of the earth was loathsomeness. Wild beasts afflicted without torments under the lashing sands and ashes. All right, came out of their lairs in the wastelands and cave places and stalked the abodes of men. All the tame beasts whimpered, and the land was filled with the cries of sheep and moans of cattle. Trees throughout the land were destroyed, and no herb or fruit was to be found. The face of the land was battered and devastated by the hail of stones, which was smashed down, all that stood in the path of the torrent. They swept down in hot showers, and strand following fire rain along the ground in their wake. The fish of, you know what? That's where they got that from in that back in the day, that old Moses movie with what's that, Charleston Heston, where remember when the hell was falling and the ground was burning. That's where they got that part I just finished reading. The fish. So they've been reading this book for a long time. The fish of the river died in the polluted waters. Worms, insects, reptiles sprung up from the earth in huge numbers. Great gusts of wind blew swarms of locusts to cover the skies. That's actually what's happening. The destroyer flung itself through the heavens. It blew great gusts of cinders across the face of the land. The gloom of the long night spread a dark mantle of blackness which extinguished every ray of light. None knew when it was day or when it was night, for the sun cast no shadow. The darkness was not the clean blackness of night, but a thick darkness in which the breath of men was stopped and in their throats. Men gasped in hot clouds of vapor which enveloped all the land and snuffed out all lamps of fire. Men were benumbed and lay moaning in their beds. None spoke to another and took food, for they were overwhelmed with despair. Ships were sucked away from their moorings and destroyed in great whirlpools. It was a time of undoing. The earth turned over as clay spun upon the potter's wheel. The whole land was filled with uproar from the thunder of the destroyer overhead and the cry of the people. There as the sound of moaning and lamentation on every side. The earth spewed up its dead corpses, were cast up out of their resting places, and the embalmed were revealed to the sight of all men. Pregnant women miscarried, and the seed of men was stopped. The craftsman left his task undone, the potter abandoned his wheel, and the carpenter his tools, and they departed to dwell in the marshes. All crafts were neglected, and the slaves lured the craftsmen away. The dues of Pharaoh could not be collected, for there was neither wheat nor barley, goose nor fish, The rights of Pharaoh could not be enforced on the fields of grain, and the pastures were destroyed. The highborn and the lowly prayed together to life might come to an end, and the turmoil and thundering ceased to beat upon their ears. Terror was the companion of men by day, and horror their companion by night. Men lost their senses and became mad. They were distracted by frightfulness. On the great night of the destroyer's wrath, when its terror was at its height, there was a hail of rocks, and the earth heaved as pain rent her bowels. Gate, Gates, columns, and walls were consumed by fire, and statues of gods were overthrown and broken. People fled outside their dwellings in fear and were slain by the hail. Those who took shelter from the hail were swallowed up by the earth, split open. The habitations of men collapsed upon those inside of and there was panic on every hand. But the slaves who lived in huts in the reed lands at the place of pits were spared. The land burnt like thunder. A man watched upon his rooftops, and the heavens hurled wrath upon him, and he died. The land rafed under the wrath of the destroyer, and groaned with the agony of Egypt. It shook itself, and the temples and palaces of the nobles were thrown down from their foundations. The highborn one perished in the midst of the ruins, and all strength of the land was stricken. Even the great one, the firstborn of the Pharaoh, died with the highborn in the midst of the terror and falling stones. The children of princes were cast out into the streets, and those who were not cast out died within their abodes. There were 9 days of darkness and upheaval, while a tempest raged, such as never been known before. When it passed away, brother buried brother throughout the land. Men rose up against those in authority and fled from the cities to dwell in tents in the outlands. Egypt lacked great men to deal with the times. The people were weak from fear and bestowed gold, silver, lapis, lazuli, turquoise, and copper upon the slaves, and their priests they gave chalices, urns, and ornaments. Pharaoh alone remained calm and strong in the midst of confusion. The people turned to wickedness in their weakness and despair. Harlots walked through the streets unashamed. People paraded their limbs and flaunted their womanly charms. High-born women were in rags, and the virtuous were mocked. Hey, all the roads changed quick, huh? The slaves spared by the destroyer left the accursed land forthwith, and their multitude moved in the gloom of a half dawn under the mantle of fine swirling gray ash, leaving the burnt fields and shattered cities behind them. Many Egyptians attached themselves to the host, for one who was great led them forth. So it says, many Egyptians attached themselves to the host, for one who was great led them forth. That was talking about Moses, a priest prince of the inner courtyard. Fire mounted up on high, and its burning left with the enemies of Egypt. It rose up from the ground as a fountain and hung as a curtain in the sky. 7 days by Remwar, the accursed ones journeyed to the waters. They crossed the heaving wilderness while the hills melted around them. Above, the skies were torn with lightning. They were sped by terror, but their feet became entangled in the land, and the wilderness shut them in. They knew not the way, for no sign was constant before them. They turned before Noshara and stopped at Shokoth, the place of quarries. They passed the waters of Mahah and came by the valley of Picaroth, northward of Myra. They came up against the waters which blocked their way, and their hearts were in despair. The night was a night of fear and dread, for there was a high moaning above, and black winds from the underworld were loosed, and the fire sprung up from the ground. The hearts of the slaves shrunk within them, for they knew the wrath of Pharaoh followed them, and they followed them, and that there was no way to escape. They hurled abuse on those who led them. Strange rites were performed along the shore at that night. The slaves disputed among themselves, and there was violence. Yeah, they was tripping, right? Y'all see what our people was doing? Pharaoh gathered his army and followed the slaves. After he departed, there were riots and disorder behind him, for the cities were plundered, the laws were cast out, and the judgment halls were trampled underfoot in the streets. The storehouses and granaries were burst open and robbed. Roads were flooded, and none could pass through them. People lay dead on every side. The palace was split, and the princes and officials fled, so that none was left with authority to command. The lists of numbers were destroyed. Public places were overthrown, and households became confused and unknown. Pharaoh pressed on in sorrow, for behind him all were desolation and death. Before him were things he could not understand, and he was afraid, but he carried himself well and stood before his host with courage. He sought to bring back the slaves, for the people said their magic was greater than the magic of Egypt. The host of Pharaoh came upon the slaves by the saltwater shores, but was held back from them by a breath of fire. A great cloud was spread over the host and darkness of the sky, and darkened the sky. None could see except for the fiery glow and the unceasing lightnings which rent the covering cloud overhead. A whirlwind arose in the east and swept over the encamped host. A gale raged all night, and in the red twilight dawn there was a movement of the earth. The waters receded from the shoreline and were rolled back on themselves. There was a strange silence, and men in the gloom. It was seen that the waters had parted, leaving a passage between. The land had risen, but it was not disturbed and trembled. The way was not straight or clear. The waters about were as if spun within a bowl. The swirl land alone remained undisturbed. Oh, swampland. I said swirl land. I don't know what I was looking at. The swampland alone remained oh wow, battery's dying. The swampland alone remained undisturbed. From the horn of the destroyer came a high swirling noise, which stopped the ears of men. So right there, that tell you that the destroyer is the Most High. The slaves have been making sacrifices in despair. Their lamentations were loud. Now before the strange sight there was a hesitation and doubt. For the space of a breath they stood still and silent. Then all was confusion and shouting, some pressing forward on the waters against all who sought to flee back from the unstable ground. When an exultation, their leader led them into the midst of the waters through the confusion. Yet many sought to turn back into the host behind them, while others fled along the empty shores. All became still over the seas and upon the shore. But behind, the earth shook and boulders split with a great noise. The wrath of heaven was removed to a distance and stood upwards of the two hosts. I'm sorry. Still, the host of Pharaoh held its ranks, firm and resolved before the strange and awful happenings, and undaunted by the fury which raged by their side. Stern faces were lit darkly by the fiery curtain. They crazy. Then the fury departed, and there was silence. Stillness spread over the land, while the host of Pharaoh stood without movement in the red glow. Then, with a shout, the captains went forward, and the host rose up behind them. The curtain of fire had rolled up into a dark billow cloud, which spread out as a canopy. There was a stirring of the waters, but they followed. The evildoers passed the place of the great whirlpool. The passage was confused in the midst of the waters, and the ground beneath unstable. Here, in the midst of the tumult of waters, Pharaoh fought against a hindmost of the slaves and prevailed. So he was killing our people right in that joint. He was in there killing them over them. And there was a great slaughter amid the sand, the swamp, and the water. The slaves cried out in despair, but their cries were unheeded. Their possessions were scattered behind them as they fled, so that the way was easier for them than for those who followed. Then the stillness was broken by a mighty roar, and through the rolling pillars of the clouds, the wrath of the destroyer descended upon the host. The heavens roared as with 1,000 thunders. The bowels of the earth were sundered, and the earth shrieked its agony. The cliffs were torn away and cast down. The dry ground fell beneath the waters, and the great waves broke upon the shore, sweeping in rocks from sand seaward. The great surge of rocks and waters overwhelmed the chariots of the Egyptians, who went before the footmen. What is that? The chariot of Pharaoh was hurled into the air as if by a mighty hand, and was crushed in the midst of the rolling waters. Tidings of disaster came back by Regeb, the son of Thamat, who hastened on ahead of the terrified survivors because of his burning. He brought reports unto the people that the host had been destroyed by the blast and deluge. The captains had gone, the strong men had fallen, and none remained to command. Therefore, the people revolted because of the calamities which had befallen them. Cowards slunk from their lairs and came forth boldly to assume the high office of the dead. Comely and noble women, their protectors gone, were their prey. Of the slaves, the greater number had perished before the host of Pharaoh. I hear somebody yelling. The broken land lay helpless. The invaders came out of the gloom like Charon. A strange people came up against Egypt, and none stood to fight, for strength and courage were gone. The invaders, led by Alcanan, came up out of the land of gods, because of the wrath of heaven, which had laid their land waste. There too had been a plague of reptiles, ants, signs, omens, and earthquake. There also had been turmoil, disaster, disorder, famine, with great breath of the destroyer sweeping the ground and stopping the breath of men. And Torah gathered together the remnants of his fighting men, and the fighting men who were left in Egypt, and set forth to meet the children of darkness, who came out of the eastern mountains by way of the wilderness, and by way of Yeth Noblis. They fell upon the stricken land from behind the great cloud, before the lifting of the darkness, and before the coming of the purifying winds. Ragib went with Pharaoh and met the invaders at Harosher. By the hearts of the Egyptians were faint within them. Their spirits were no longer strong, and they fell away before the battle was lost. Deserted by the gods above and below, their dwellings destroyed, their households scattered. They were as men already half dead. Their hearts were still filled with terror and with the memory of the wrath which had struck them from out of heaven. They were still filled with the memory of the fearsome sight of the destroyer, and they knew not what they did. Wow. That sounds just like these idiots. Pharaoh did not return to his city. He lost his heritage and was seized by a demon for many days. His women was polluted and his estates plundered. The children of darkness defiled the temples with rams and ravished women who were crazed and did not resist. They enslaved all who were left, the old young men and boys. They oppressed the people, and their delight was in mutilation and torture. Dang. It don't sound good to put us in captivity. Pharaoh abandoned his hopes and fled into the wilderness beyond the province of the lake, which is in the west towards the south. He lived a goodly life among the sand wanderers and wrote books. Good times came again, even under the invaders, and ships sailed upstream. The air was purified, the breath of the destroyer passed away, and the land became filled again with growing things. Life was renewed throughout the whole land. Caer taught these things to the children of light in the days of darkness, after the building of Rambudeth, before the death of Pharaoh Ankned, Ankhed, or something like that. This is written in this land and in our tongue by Lueder, who himself chose it for saving. It was not seen until the latter days. All right, y'all. I read it all. I'll go through this again and see what I read before, and I'll just keep reading everything that I did before and post it now, so that way you don't have to be going all the way back almost a year ago, for the reading. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Leave me some comments. Tell me what you think. So that was the whole of the destroyer, the dark days, and the destruction of Egypt. All right, y'all. Shalom.